My name is Laurie Smithcamp. I'm a judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Nebraska.
I am Leirion Gaylor Baird, Mayor of Lincoln, Nebraska.
Hi, my name is Brooke Mullen, and I'm the founder and designer of an ethical fashion line called Schimek.
Hello, I'm DiAnna Schimek, and I served 20 years in the Nebraska State Legislature and about a year and a half on the Lincoln City Council.
Hi, my name is Bhoopalam. I'm 18 years old and I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. I recently founded an organization called Dream Equal, which is dedicated to empowering young people through combating gender stereotypes at the age in which they develop.
I've thought a lot about this over the years. I did my graduate degree in comparative social research and I studied parental leave policy, how it exists in different countries, and childcare and early education. And what you see often is that despite the advancements women have made in their educational attainment, and despite the increasing numbers of women who are participating in the workforce, the bulk of domestic labor, care for children, care for aging parents, still falls on women's shoulders, and that can be a big hindrance to full and equal participation in our economic life, getting those incomes that secure freedom and the ability to enjoy a high quality of life. And while we've made big progress, I will point to my husband as example one. His role in raising our children and taking care of our family, it makes it possible for me to serve as mayor. We still have a way to go, and it's still much more socially common for women to take on those caring roles. So I think that's a big hindrance still today in our achievement as a gender.
What it comes down to for me is thinking about, are women equal? Are we seen as equal? And I think the answer in a whole society, it's no. I think women today still are seen as less than men, their counterparts. When you look at their abilities, their education, their experiences and talent to offer, I think there still is a great opportunity to push forward in that. I think also that by not having women in power, women in those power positions, a seat at the table more and more in an equal way, I think we're all losing out as a community and as a society. Women's voices do, we know it again and again that by bringing women's voices to the table, there's so much more prosperity and opportunity to be represented.
Well, I hesitate to say one thing because there are several factors intertwined, but mainly I think it's the conflict that women have over their responsibilities. The women and their families conflict oftentimes with the job opportunities or the political office they want to run for. So that's a major component, but it's also tied to the mores and traditions of our country and the way men view women having opportunities. I can remember the time when men's egos would not allow them to have a woman boss. That was just unheard of. And that, of course, has changed a great deal. Although I think there is a little bit of that still.
I think the biggest challenge that women face in terms of advancement is that we don't have enough people that are advocating for us in positions of power. Right now, because we obviously live in a patriarchal society, the people that are making decisions about women's advancement aren't women. And those people, unfortunately, don't have the awareness and the education to advocate for us. So what's keeping us from advancing fast in our current society is that we don't have these people that are advocating for us. So we really need to focus on educating them so we can get women's advancement faster and get us in positions of power so we can make those decisions for ourselves. But moreover, when we think about what's the greatest barrier to advancement, we must realize that there's not one thing that we can say that, okay, this is the greatest barrier to advancement for all women, because every single woman has different experiences. And when we categorize women, when we broadly say this is an issue that all women face, we're not taking into account that every single woman faces them in different levels, in different areas, in different degrees. And so when we're thinking about what's the biggest barrier to advancement, we must realize that for some women, especially minority women, the biggest barrier to advancement is different.
The biggest remaining challenge is culture. I don't believe that women are held back by the lack of an Equal Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution or the lack of any particular statutes, but we still have a way to go with our society's culture. We see polarization in our society, especially in the last few years, but we have also seen tremendous progress over the last few decades. And as men have come through the educational system in sexually integrated schools, and they have started off their careers in a sexually integrated workforce, it's made many positive changes in our culture. And we also see employers now who value diversity, and we see voters who value diversity. When that happens, women are valued more. And I have seen tremendous progress in my lifetime, and I have no doubt that it is going to continue.
I think it would have happened faster, and I think mostly due to technology. I think the movement itself, I don't know how much it would have changed in dynamic. I think it would have amplified voices stronger and more globally. That it happened so long ago, it was also often segmented, right? So today with technology, social media, smartphones, whatnot, we're able to, I think, be more powerful, and our voices carry a lot more weight. And it gives people who feel like they don't have a voice or have lost hope or almost kind of believe that maybe this is all that's there, that I don't have, that I am second fiddle, I'm second class in some ways, that I think it raises people up to give hope and in a different way, because we can connect together globally and faster. I think also the suffrage movement, I think if it happened today, historically it was primarily white women. I think it would be incredibly more diverse to represent all women today.
At first I think, well, that's a no-brainer. It would pass easily. I think the difference is that today we have news 24/7. We have social media. We have computers, which allows people to write letters back and forth instantaneously almost. And if you think back to Seneca Falls when the suffragettes had their big convention conference, that must have taken months to organize. You could do it in a week now if you needed to, because people are used to that kind of thing. It used to be if you sent invitations to a fundraiser or a function that it would be a month in advance that you would need to get those invitations prepared and sent out. Today you can do it 2 days ahead of time and still get a turnout. So I think communication has been a huge factor in that.
The women's suffrage movement was said to have ended 100 years ago when the 19th Amendment was passed, but for many women, they didn't receive the right to vote until the 1960s. For example, in some southern states, women didn't get that right to vote. Black women didn't get that right to vote until the 1960s. And today, there's so many voter ID laws that keep women from voting, especially black and brown women, minority women, from exercising their right to vote. So even though the women's suffrage movement is said to not be in the modern times and is said to have passed 100 years ago, we are still experiencing the women's suffrage movement today. So I think rather than asking the question, how would it be different if it was placed in modern times, we should be asking ourselves, how can we better support the women's suffrage movement that is going on today?
I have no doubt that the women of today would be just as courageous and just as tenacious as the women 100 years ago and earlier in their fight for women's suffrage. And I am sure that the men of today would be even more supportive than the men of 100 years ago. One thing that is different today, besides simply the things such as social media and the way that the movement would take place, is the fact that we know there is a gender gap in voting. 100 years ago, people knew, or at least suspected, that there would be a gender gap in votes for things related to prohibition. Today we know that there's about a 10% difference in the way men vote and women vote because of the alignment of the political parties and the way that they have evolved over the years. So if only men had the vote today, they might have to think twice about whether they really would want to support women's suffrage, knowing that women would vote in a way that is substantially different from the way that men vote. So that would be a topic of conversation, but I believe that we would still prevail.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I think women would be taken to the streets in pantsuits and comfortable shoes. You know, the women who came before us in the 1800s and early 1900s were breaking ground. They were probably seen as radical for their times, but we owe them a great debt of service. They've made it possible for so many other women to participate fully in our political and economic life. And if we were fighting for suffrage in modern times, we'd have a lot more advantages that they didn't have, besides more comfortable clothes. We have more full economic participation. We have microphones on social media and in political life. More of us are in a position to vote and make changes that improve the life and liberty of women. And they were at the time lucky if they could leave the domestic sphere, and few of them had higher education. Fewer women in our country had higher education at that time, and a voice and an opportunity to interact with people in positions of power. We are so lucky that the suffragettes who were able to break away from those traditional roles and have a voice and pressure the powers that be for improvements in our freedoms, we were very lucky that they were able to do that.
Well, it's given me a voice, and it gives women in general a voice. As an elected official, I felt like I had the power to advocate for certain groups of people or certain issues. I had the power to help those people. I remember one time there was a woman who came to our office wanting help when I was in the legislature because she couldn't get a job. Well, I had a staffer who was just bound and determined she was going to help that woman find a job. It took a while, but she finally did. And to the best of our knowledge, that woman was still there months and maybe even a year later. So it was successful. She just needed an opportunity, and she needed somebody to speak for her. That occurred time and time again. Also, there have been some studies that have been put together by the Women in Politics division at Princeton University at Rutgers. And what they found is that the more women you have in the legislature, the more attention there is to women's issues. And it's not that men never promoted women's issues. They did, but they never prioritized it. So they often didn't get them passed.
I clearly remember the day that our president was elected because I was 15 years old and I went to school the next day, and I was terribly, terribly angry because there's so many politically charged conversations that were happening between my teachers and my friends and my peers, and the entire time I was angry for one because I wasn't happy with the result of the election, but most of all, I was angry and mad because I felt like I had no say in what happened in the election. So when I turned 18 years old just a couple months ago, I remember being so excited because I had gotten the biggest gift that year. I was able to exercise my right to vote. And so I voted for the first time in the mayoral election. And I remember I was so excited, I felt so empowered because for the first time, I had seen issues in my society and I was able to act on them with just a simple bubble on a piece of paper.
Well, I see that as a two-part question. having the vote personally myself gives me an ownership interest in my country. It gives me the responsibility to learn about candidates, to learn about issues, and to participate in the democratic process so that we have representative government. It also encourages me to work to my fullest potential, to be a valuable member of society because of that ownership interest that I have. The fact that women in general have the right to vote and are a voting constituency, and have been now for almost 100 years, has had a huge impact on my life because statutes have been enacted that would not have been enacted if women were not a voting constituency. For example, I had the right to get an education, to get higher education, to go to law school because there was Title IX. I had the right to get a job and to seek equal pay because of Title VII and the Equal Pay Act. I had the opportunity to keep a job even after I was pregnant, even after I had children. I had an opportunity to get credit, to get housing, to get health care. All of those things had a huge impact on my life because women were a voting constituency. If they had not been, those laws would not have been passed.
Democracy depends on the willingness of people to participate, to speak up and make their voices heard, to cast votes at the ballot box, or even to run for office. And we cannot take these freedoms and liberties for granted. They don't exist across the globe, and we're so lucky that we have the opportunity to fully participate in our democracy here in America. When I first considered running for office, a big motivating factor for me was to have a greater voice, to speak up and represent perspectives that weren't necessarily already there, to make sure that children across the community saw a woman in a position behind a microphone casting votes that count and make life better in our community. It's so important not only that we participate, that we run for office and make it clear that there is a role for women at every level of our democratic system. We are very underrepresented as a gender, and I hope that by serving as a city council member in the past and by serving as the current, but only the third female mayor of Lincoln, that perhaps there are girls out in the community who are watching and thinking that that possibility exists for them too.
I think it's empowered me greatly. Being able to speak open and freely of the different beliefs and experiences that I've had. Having lived in Thailand and Southeast Asia for a decade, I also realized what privilege that is. And I've realized, and I've got to meet firsthand with women who don't have that right, who don't have that freedom of expression. And so, which has allowed me then to be the voice for them in our nation, to encourage other women who feel like they don't have a voice or feel not strong to stand up, to feel that there is a place for them, or that I can also help amplify their voices. It's heartbreaking and really, it gives me goosebumps to think of the stories, the countless stories of women who don't have that in a global sense and who are held back. Their communities, their families, them as individuals are held back because they don't have that freedom of expression and that freedom to participate politically. I think as a community and as a country, as a whole, there's a lot of suffering from that. It's held back from being great.